will talk.
Never. Never. Bullshit.
And welcome to our studio series.
So Aisling, what exactly are these things anyway?
Okay, these are painting knives, or otherwise known as palette knives. And strictly speaking, this is a palette knife. And it can be used for painting, but its main job is to mix paint on a palette.
Or to scrape paint off a canvas, which is probably the first time the knives were used in connection with a canvas.
Wasn't a big leap from removing paint to applying paint to the canvas. And when did that all start?
Well, even since medieval times, painters would have used some sort of a trowel when they were working with frescoes, right?
Oh, like manipulating the wet plaster.
Yeah. So that would have been the first kind of use of it. But people think that Rembrandt and Titian also used knives in their painting.
But I don't think it was really until the 19th century around Gustave Courbet. Gustave Courbet was really intentionally using palette knives.
Yeah, in a way that you could see in an obvious way on the painting. He's also the guy, by the way, who's reputed to have invented a painting knife, like specifically for a painting.
Oh.
I wonder, did he invent this little gooseneck as well?
I don't think so. I think that goes way back. I think that's designed to keep your fingers out of the paint or plaster.
So actually, what's the attraction of these anyway?
Well, painting with a knife is a very direct way of painting. What you pick up from your palette is going to end up on your canvas. Versus painting with a brush, whatever you pick up is going to blend in a little bit with the residual paint that's left over on your brush.
And when you're working wet on wet, a brush will tend to lift up those layers underneath and mix with your top layer. In fact, with a brush, you're more often working wet in wet than wet on wet. Whereas with a knife, it's much easier to layer on that coat of paint on top without disturbing the layer underneath.
To put that together, painting with a brush gets you more blended, muted colors, and painting with a palette knife gets you pure, more vibrant colors.
Now that's not a hard and fast rule. That's not to say that you can't use certain techniques with a brush to layer wet on wet. And similarly, you can use a knife to mix up layers from underneath if you want. So that's more of a general observation. Knives also do interesting thing with edges, don't they?
They do. You can get really clean, hard edges with a knife. You can get broken edges. You can even get very fine lines. However, getting fine detail is tricky.
Yeah, that's the hardest thing for people to get used to when they start working with a knife. And sometimes you see people with these tiny little knives trying to get that detail, and they really don't work. They don't carry enough paint, and the work just looks finicky as a result. So I would say if you really do need to get into those tight corners, or if you need that extra little bit of detail, use a brush. There really is no merit to using the wrong tool for the job. So much for the tiny knives. What does somebody actually need to get started in this game?
You don't actually need that much. You can start off with just a single palette knife. You just want to make sure that it has a wide enough base so that it can hold an adequate amount of paint. You want a nice, long, straight edge to get your straight, thin lines, and a narrowed tip, preferably, to get some semblance of detail.
You could also move on to something like this. If you wanted to get longer straight edges for a horizon, for example. I'd avoid anything that's exceptionally narrow though. There's a minimum amount of surface area that you will need to carry enough paint to do the job.
What about traditional palette knives?
Yeah, they're fine. They've got a nice straight edge and they are wide enough that they carry enough paint to do the job. They're a bit of a one-trick pony though. I don't think they're as versatile as these. What about this contraption?
You know, you see these in every kit, and I have still yet to figure out what it is for.
And I'm left-handed. I have no chance with these. The bottom line is you don't need a 12-knife kit to get started. In fact, or ever, because a lot of what you get in those kits, you'll never use. And I'd avoid going down this road of weirdness.
What are those?
I think there's some sort of Klingon war paint tools or something.
What about plastic knives?
I wouldn't. The edges are dull. They don't have the springiness of a steel knife. And basically, these knives are not that expensive. So I don't know why anyone would have them in their kit.
So that's the tool. Now, how do you use it?
Well, let's assume that we're still working with an underpainting. And as you remember from earlier videos, we said that you never want to build up texture in your underpainting.
Even if you want to complete your painting with a palette knife, if you are doing an underpainting, you really should be doing your underpainting with a brush.
So next, working with a knife, you need to mix up some paint. You need thick paint. We work straight from the tube, and if you're working with acrylics, better to work with a heavy-bodied paint. Mix up some paint on your canvas.
But don't overmix. You want to mix it enough so that you get an idea of the general color mixture. But you want to have some of your source colors still visible. Think of like a marbled look. So pick up some paint on the bottom of your knife.
Hold the knife as lightly as possible, almost to the point of dropping it, and pull down. That light touch will ensure that the paint skims lightly over the surface of the painting, leaving swatches of the underpainting showing through.
The contrast of the paint on top with the tiny patches of underpainting showing through is what creates the illusion of texture, much more so than the actual physical texture of the applied paint.
Exactly. Okay, so that's texture. What else can we do with these knives?
Straight edges. To get a straight edge, you want to load the paint onto the edge of the knife, much more so than on the bottom of the knife.
So hold the knife perpendicular to the palette and move across. Then you'll see that the paint has loaded onto the very edge of the knife.
And now just touching the canvas with the edge of that knife, you can get a fine line, like a telegraph pole, mast of a boat,
fence posts, something like that.
Anything like that, yeah.
Another way to get a very fine line is simply to scratch away a layer of the wet paint with the knife and reveal the contrasting underpainting beneath.
Sgraffito.
What? Bless you, my dear.
Oh, sgraffito, like the technique.
Oh, that's what it's called? Okay. Anyway, sgraffito. It's a very fine, subtle line, and it's great for like overhead streetcar lines or telegraph wires in a street scene or the rigging of a boat.
Grasses in the foreground.
Exactly, something like that. But the paint does need to be wet. So if you're an acrylic painter, you need to move fast if you want to sgraffite. Sgraffite. What's the verb? Sgraffito, sgraffitish, sgraffite.
We're done here.
Sgraffite.
We're done here. We hope you enjoyed this video. We hope you are inspired to try out some new painting techniques in your painting practice.
And you know the drill. If you liked this video, hit that like button, subscribe to keep up to date, and do post a comment because we do read them.
We are happy to answer any of your questions.
So until the next video.
Bye.